So this week I want to talk about implementing 3D into a photograph here inside Photoshop CS5 Extended. Now, a lot of tutorials I've done up till now talk about different things you can create with 3D in Photoshop and then adding that as part of a design or whatever, but implementing a 3D object in an actual photographic environment is a little bit different, and it's surprisingly not as difficult as it might seem. So, for instance, here in this photo, I've got this really nice photo of this beach area, and I want to have it look like there's some text sitting on the beach, complete with shadows and everything, to really get that convincing look. Well, the first thing we need to do is actually create the 3D element. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the text tool here, and let's go ahead and set a text layer. So I'm just going to do a simple word. Let's go to do the word hot, because it certainly looks like it's hot there at the beach. So we'll go ahead and make this pretty big, and I've got it in impact font, which is a very simple font to use here, nice and bold, so it'll show the 3D volume really well. And don't want to go ahead and change the color because black just isn't going to work for this. So let's go ahead and start with white and go ahead and make the letters white there. There we go. And with that text layer selected, we're going to go ahead and go to 3D to Repoussé and choose text layer. Now it's going to go ahead and make the letters 3D and open up the Repoussé panel here. Let's go ahead and turn this off for the moment. So in here we've got the text and it is extruded. If I click here and rotate it around, you can see there it is my 3D text. Now the problem here is it's a little thicker than I want it to be here on the extrusion. So let's go into the extrude section in where it says depth, and let's go ahead and highlight that and make that around 0.5. So it makes the letters a little bit thinner. In fact, you can go thinner if you want. I'm going to go and do about 0.4. So that looks pretty good. So we go back to the home position, so it's facing front here. Just click on that little home icon at the bottom of the toolbar right here. And that's all we're going to do. Now I could, of course, come back and make any changes that I need to, but all I really wanted to do is extrude that text. And now that that's done, we'll go ahead and click OK, and there's the text. Now, need to position it so it's sitting in the right angle here based on the photograph. Well, if I go into the 3D panel, let's go under Window and go to 3D, open up the 3D panel, I'm going to need a visual aid to help me position this. Now, you just saw it on a moment ago, but I'm going to turn it back on, and that is the ground plane. So if I select the 3D tool here and go into the bottom of the 3D panel here, there's this little icon here. If you click on that, it's a menu to turn on these different wireframes. So we're going to go ahead and select 3D ground plane, and it's going to go ahead and turn that on. This gives us a grid that the letters are sitting on, which gives us a visual aid to help match it up to whatever our horizon is on our photograph. Well, what I need to do first is, obviously, we need to tilt it so it looks a little bit more at the right angle, and also at a better angle so it looks a little bit more interesting. Just looking at it straight on just doesn't really work. So, you might think you can go ahead in here and grab the 3D Object Rotate tool. But the problem is if I take the standard 3D Object Rotate tool here in the toolbar and start to rotate the object around, you'll notice that the ground plane does not move, and the letters of themselves are moving around. Well, this is okay if you were not compositing this inside of another environment. But however, since we are, we need to employ something called the ground plane shadow catcher. Now, what that is that it will interpret this ground plane you're looking at, this grid right here, as a plane that can receive a shadow cast by this 3D object. But if that position is changed by rotating like this, obviously that shadow isn't going to look right because some of the object is now below the ground plane. So what we need to be able to do is still be able to shift the angle of our graphic, but keeping it level on the ground plane. So what we need to do is, instead of moving the object, you want to move the camera. And that is the tools just below. Here you have the 3D camera rotate tool. So if I go and grab this, notice if I click and drag around and move it, that the graphic and the ground plane are moving as one. So now I can better position it inside of my image that I'm working with here. We'll just kind of give that a little bit of a turn there. And then we'll just grab the 3D camera pan tool and just drag it down. So it looks a little bit better and looks a little bit more convincing there. And the ground plane is staying put. So in order to be able to see the shadow, you need to go into the 3D panel again, and then up here, click on the flyout menu and choose Ground Plane Shadow Catcher. Now just turning it on, you can see it's checked on, but we didn't see any change in our image. That's because a shadow has to be rendered inside Photoshop. Now, before we render it, we need to actually have some lights that will give us the proper shadow. So for the moment, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the ground plane. So go back in that menu and turn off the ground plane for the moment. So looking at my photograph, I can see that the light is kind of up here in the upper left area of the image. It's coming from the upper left, or pretty much behind the left side of the wherever the picture was taken. So let's position a 3D light based on that. So let's go into the lights section here. I'm going to go into the spotlights and go down here and choose New Spotlight. And there's the wireframe for that spotlight. It's pretty much in the right position, but we need to just kind of move it around. So let's grab the 3D light slide tool here inside the toolbar, and we'll just kind of click and drag. And if you click and drag down, it'll actually slide the light towards you, basically coming at you in space. And then we can use the 3D light rotate tool to kind of move it around and illuminate the object based on its positioning. I'm also going to go ahead and widen the scope of the light. Notice how it's kind of a narrow cone of light here? Well, if you go into the 3D panel with the light section activated, down here toward the bottom, you've got the fall off. I'm going to go in there and increase that to around 70, and you'll see the scope of the light just got a lot wider. So with the light in position and everything looking okay, let's go ahead and see what our shadows are going to look like. So we'll go into the 3D scene panel, which is the first icon here in the 3D panel. Go down here to the quality menu and choose Ray Trace Draft. And that's going to do a quick progressive rendering the shadows based on the positioning of the object. And there you can see, not looking too bad. It's really it really is immediately got a convincing sense of actually sitting on the sand here and looking like it's kind of sitting there and really casting shadows on there. And now we know what the initial shadows are looking like, so we can tweak our lights depending on how the shadows are interactive. Now you'll see it added 3 infinite lights by default earlier. So if that's too much light, or if you want to change the position of those, just go in there and highlight them, and then go in here and rotate these objects around, and then it will do another render, and you can get better positioning of the lights, and which will ultimately obviously affect the positioning of the shadows here inside the image. So pretty simple way of taking simple letters, turning them into a 3D object, and then making it look like it's convincingly sitting inside of a photograph area. Here in this case, the letters really kind of have that look like they're sitting on the beach. Now, certainly could take it a few steps further by adding some textures to the face of the letters and such to really sell it in that environment. But sometimes all you really want is just to take a simple text element and just put it in an environment and really make it look like it's sitting there. So manipulating the shadows, or manipulating the lights on the 3D object will ultimately determine the placement of those shadows, and always make sure that that ground plane shadow catcher is on. And if for whatever reason your graphic, you rotate it, or maybe you rotate the object and it's not level on the ground plane anymore, all you need to do is just go back to this item here and choose Snap Object to Ground Plane, and it will put that graphic back level on the ground plane. It will re-render, and there you have your graphic, nice and pretty, getting a lovely tan on the beach.